Okay, guys. Okay, guys. So we said today we're gonna continue on the listening section. And we're gonna start this next part of the listening section, which is lectures, right? TOEFL lectures. So remember we said you have two different types of tasks, types of things that you have to do. The first one was what we did the past few days. We did conversations. And now we're gonna be moving on to the next part, which is lectures, okay? So you already know what a lecture is, right? We've seen it many times. A lecture is basically a university class for the TOEFL. Now, the number of lectures that you're going to have in the TOEFL listening is 3 or 4, we said, right? It depends on whether you have the extra task or not. Now, these lectures, I'm not going to lie, they're a little bit longer than the conversations. They are about 3 to 5 minutes long. So sometimes it's 4, sometimes it even goes farther and it's like 6 minutes long. It depends, but on average, 3 to 5. And per lecture, you won't have 5 questions anymore. You will have 1 more. So per lecture, you will get 6 questions. Okay? In the lectures, you will only hear the professor speak. And of course, some students can participate, but mostly it's just the professor. That's the main speaker. So do you guys have any questions before we start? No questions? All right. Okay, guys. Now, the best thing that we can do the best thing we can do here to work on the lectures, first of all, is learn to basically understand the structures of the lectures that you have, right? In this lecture, remember it's a university class, so the professor is going to be explaining one specific topic. The lectures aren't going to be more than one thing. In the first 30 seconds, you usually have like a short introduction, and then the whole lecture is usually structured in a different way. So I cannot tell you which type of structure you have, but I'm going to be giving you some examples. But in general, in the lecture, we'll have a lot of facts, a lot of studies and details and examples and theories, sequence of events, stories, and so forth. Okay, and you have to pay attention to those details because they usually matter a lot. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start looking at some examples right away. So let's see a few examples. Okay. So the first thing that I want you guys to do, don't take any notes. I just want you to pay attention to this first part. We're not going to hear the entire lecture, okay? But pay attention. It's an introduction.
Listen to part of a lecture from a life sciences class. Raise your hand if you're right-handed. Yep, that looks typical. Most of us, about 90%, are right-handed. It's been that way throughout history. In nearly every culture, right has been associated with positive qualities, while the left has been associated with negative, or even evil ones. In Latin,
Okay. So as you can see, those 30 seconds, that was the introduction. So what is this lecture going to be about? What do you think?
It's about right-handed people and how they are, the history about how they are associated with good things and about being right-handed or left-handed.
Great. So in that first part, you already have an idea of what everything will be about, of what the lecture will be about. So during those first 30 seconds, it's always better not to take notes. The same thing that we did for those of you who were here in the speaking question number 4. Okay, so same thing here when you're listening to a lecture. During the first seconds, just pay attention to understand what it's going to be about. And that is going to really give you a good idea. Now let's listen to another example of an introduction. This is a little bit more complete.
Listen to part of a university lecture by a professor in the College of Fine Arts. Good morning, everyone. Today I want to start with a look at perspective, visual perspective. First, we'll look very briefly at the kinds of perspective, and then we'll look very quickly at its history in art. Just in case you don't know what we're discussing, perspective in art is the way that artists represent three-dimensional objects on the 2 dimensions of their canvas. There are 2 basic...
Okay, so same thing, here the first 30 seconds of the introduction. We have the transcript here, okay? I want you guys to pay attention to this introduction. What do we see in this introduction? What do we have? First thing, we have a greeting, right? The professor says, good morning, everyone. Now, what else do we have? What is this? When he says, today, I want to start with a look at perspective, visual perspective. What is that?
He's mentioning the topic.
Exactly. That is the topic of the lecture, right? In the introduction. Then we have first, we look briefly at the kinds of perspective, and then we'll look very quickly at its history in art. What is that?
The subtopics he's going to talk about.
Yes, these are, we could say maybe the subtopics, right? But we are going to say this is the structure of the lecture. This is information that you will be seeing specifically. And this is how the professor will structure the lecture. To be honest, understanding those 2 things is going to be key for understanding the entire lecture. If you guys want to do well in the total lectures, then you need to very closely pay attention to the introduction and most importantly, be able to identify the different structures that you have, because there are many different structures, many different possible structures. For example, here he says, we'll look briefly at the kinds of perspective, right? And I mean, we also got to hear a little bit of the second part, and he was saying there are 2 basic sorts. So those words are telling you that this lecture is probably going to have the structure of classification. So the professor is going to classify certain things. So types of something, kinds of something, sorts of something is the same. So you're going to have different categories, you're going to have different subtitles that are how something is classified, right? So classification. And then that isn't just it. We look very, very quickly at its history in art. So when you have history, you know that that's going to be a sequence of events. So you have those 2 types of structures. You have classification and you have sequence of events. Because every time that you have something related to history, the history of something or somebody's biography, then you always have a sequence of events, right? This happened first, this happened later, this happened at the end. So you have an order of events. So why is this important? Because once you're able to distinguish that and identify what the structure of the lecture will be, then you will become an active listener. You're not going to be surprised when they start talking about this. You already know what to expect, right? You know, okay, so in the first part, I need to understand the types of perspective. And in the second, I need to look at the sequence of events, history now. And that makes you more alert. So when you start listening the next part, then it'll be easier for you, okay? That is really important to say. Now, as for structures, there are many, many types. We'll see some examples in a bit. And finally, what do we have next? They say, just in case you don't know what we're discussing, perspective in art is the way that artists represent three-dimensional. What is that? The third part.
Good afternoon. Sorry for the delay. I was working. You tell me what do we have to do?
We didn't do anything yet. We're looking at the second part of the TOEFL listening, which is lectures.
Oh,
And we're taking a look at the structure of the lectures.
oh, I see.
Okay. So what is this last thing that is underlined in orange? It's a definition, right? The definition of the topic in this case. So the topic was perspective, and here the professor is defining it for you. Now, you won't always have that same definition. Sometimes you have other things. Like in the previous lecture we were listening to, the one about right-handed people, you didn't have a definition of what is handedness. You had I think it was a commentary about the history of it, right? So how it was seen, or like the prejudices that we have. That was that. Sometimes you have an explanation, sometimes you have an example, or sometimes the professor asks a question and the professor is like, so who can tell me what handedness is, right? And maybe a student is gonna give a definition and the professor will say, oh, this is right or this is wrong. Okay, so you may have different things there, but it's always something that is gonna kind of give you context as to what the topic will be. Okay, guys? So that will be like the context we can say. So is this okay? Do you guys understand the structure of the introduction? The tip that I'm giving you is please don't take notes there. You could take notes about the definition. If you have a definition, if you have an explanation, if you have examples, or anything that you think is relevant, then please you can take notes of this last part. But in the beginning, at least the two first things, you should be paying attention instead of taking notes, because that is key. If you understand the structure, then your notes are going to be more organized. You will understand better. You will be able to answer the questions better. Everything here is about how organized your notes are. Really. Okay? You can take notes for the explanation or what you have in the third point. Is this okay? Do you have any questions so far? So before we move on, before we start looking at some examples, okay, so for example, here are some ideas or some examples of the types of structures that are very common in TOEFL lectures. So for example, one of them is compare and contrast. That is very common. So sometimes you have a comparison. It's like, okay, today we're gonna compare capitalism versus communism. And in the entire lecture, you have a comparison. So you're gonna show the similarities, they're gonna show the differences, and that will be the structure of the lecture, right? Comparison and contrast. Sometimes you have definitions. So maybe the lecture is about the different definitions of money. I don't know if with you guys we did a lecture like that in the speaking, but there was this lecture that was definitions of money. And then you have different definitions, right? You have definition number one, the broad definition, the narrow definition. So that could be another structure. Sometimes you have steps of a process. So maybe we're talking about the embryonic development. So you have step number 1, step number 2, step number 3, and it's like a recipe, you know, and you have to be paying attention at the steps. The one we were doing was classification, right? You said, so you have the types of perspective, the types of pollution, the types of this, the types of that. Sometimes we have theory and support. So Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, and you have different pieces of evidence that support that theory. Sometimes you have advantages and disadvantages, which is something like, you know, like the advantages of, like the one we did, the article we read about self-driving cars. I don't know if you guys were there, but maybe autonomous cars, the advantages and the disadvantages of that, or solar energy, advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes you have cause and effect, right? Maybe the causes of pollution, the effects of pollution. So those are really common types of structures. Those are the most common types of organizational styles, as I say here. Okay. So understanding this is going to be the base of how you take your notes, and how you take your notes really defines a big part of how well you can answer the questions. Okay. Do you have any questions about this? Do you understand the idea of the structure of the lecture and how it helps? Any questions? Okay, guys. So we're gonna, okay, one more thing. Before we start looking at an example, how do you have to take your notes? I want you guys to, we're gonna listen to this lecture, okay? We're just gonna listen. Just pay attention. We're not gonna take any notes.
Listen to part of a university lecture by a professor of comparative religion. Good afternoon, class. In the course of this term, we've examined all the major contemporary religions of the world: Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Hinduism in depth. But before your final examination, I also want to spend a couple of classes looking at some of the more interesting minor religions. And I'd like to start with a very simple, harmless religion that managed to have a disproportionately large influence on world history. And that religion is Shintoism, or Shinto, which is the indigenous religion of Japan. There was no historical...
Okay, guys. Did you notice, were you able to notice that pause that the professor made before starting with something else? Like, let's play this part again.
Large influence on world history. And that religion is Shintoism.
What is the topic, right? The topic of this lecture will be Shintoism. We have the definition.
Or Shinto, which is the indigenous religion of Japan.
Did you notice that pause, which is the indigenous religions of Japan? And then the professor stops for a second before starting with something else, right? Can you notice that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can understand listening, but I cannot understand the name of the religions in Japan.
It's called Shintoism.
Could you please type it? Sorry. Shintoism. Okay. Shintoism. Shintoism.
Did you guys notice that pause that the professor made? Yes.
History. And that religion is Shintoism, or Shinto, which is the indigenous religion of Japan. There was no historical founder of Shinto like Buddha or Muhammad, and Shinto has no sacred texts. It has no images or icons. It has no laws or commandments. It emerged organically from prehistoric nature worship, a sort of animism, and the ancestor worship of the earliest Japanese people. And, with due allowance for the general advance of civilization, it has remained surprisingly unchanged from that primitive condition. Its basic concept.
Then we had another pause, right? Right now I'm showing you the transcript. So we were there, right? The primitive condition. The professor made a pause and then it started again. Its basic concept is that
Civilization, it has remained surprisingly unchanged from that primitive condition. Its basic concept is that virtually every natural object is inhabited by a kami, variously translated as a spirit or god, and that all kami are worthy of reverence and respect. One enterprising anthropologist.
okay? So why am I showing you this? Because your notes are gonna have to follow that same structure. So if you think about it, this was the introduction, right? We have the greeting, we have a little bit of context, we have the topic, and we have its definition. But then, aside from the introduction, this first or this second paragraph that you're seeing, in the transcript, you see it as a paragraph, but in the lecture, you cannot see the paragraph, right? Because you can actually see the transcript when you're doing the TOEFL test. But if you think about it, this second paragraph, what was it about? It had just one idea in that paragraph, right? So what was it about?
Sorry, the main idea is that we compare within Islamic Christian, there is no an idol in this religion.
Okay. But I mean, in general, what is it about?
It's like an introduction of topic.
This was the introduction. This isn't an introduction anymore. This is about the origin of the religion, right? The history of religion. This was about the origin of the religion. The third paragraph is about something else entirely. What is it about?
Is what how it works, this religion, or how they consider is something like a miracle inside its religion.
Okay, so yeah, basically how it works, right? It's the concept of the religion, what the people that practice this religion believe in, how it works, what they have to do. So the concept. Then we have another paragraph that we haven't heard yet, but it is also about a different idea. For example, this one is about Shinto shrines. So this is only about the shrines. So they describe the shrine, for example, they say they are distinctively marked by this, which is a traditional gate, right? These gates, different gods are enshrined in each shrine. So all of this paragraph is about one idea, shrines. Next thing is gonna be the same. This paragraph, next paragraph is same thing, a different idea. I think this one is about Buddhism. I think it's about how Buddhism influenced Shintoism, something like that, but it's about Buddhism. This is the contribution of Shinto to world history. And they even have like a short introduction. They say, and this leads us nicely to what I mentioned before, the contribution of Shinto to world history. And then they explain that, right? The contribution of Shinto to world history. Then they talk about something else. They talk about something else in another paragraph. So each paragraph that you can see in the transcript contains a different idea. Now, you cannot see the transcript. So what you need to be able to do is identify where one idea ends and where another one begins. That is going to be the key to answering well the questions. Why? Because the questions are going to go in order all of the time. And like, for example, they can ask you something about history, right? They can ask you about the origin of Shinto. So when you don't have your notes in order, then, or when you mix your notes, right? So your notes for history and for the concept are in the same side of the paper. So they're gonna ask you about the history of Shinto, and in your notes you have something like this word, Heimi. You're gonna see it in the options, and you're gonna think that that's the answer. But if you have your notes organized, then it's easier. I mean, it's harder to get lost that way. It's harder to confuse information from one idea and use it for another. Okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take notes, something like this. let me show you. So these were my notes for this lecture that we are seeing about Shintoism.
Okay, sí, okay. Mis puntos.
No.
Human one.
Okay, I'm gonna rotate it. Okay, guys. So if you see my notes, I'm gonna close this. Okay, we're gonna make it bigger. As you can see, I have divided, first of all, my paper is in a horizontal position, right? I'm not doing it in a very typical way. And second of all, I'm organizing my notes in boxes, right? I have divided the paper in 9 boxes. And in each box, what I did was write down my notes for one specific idea. So for example, here I have the notes for the concept. So all of this is what I thought was important to take notes for the concept. You know, that was the second paragraph, I think. This is about shrines, right? I didn't quite understand what this was about. That's why it's like crossed out. But then I noticed it was about Buddhism, you know, so that is that paragraph that we said was Buddhism. Then we said the contribution of Shinto to world history, right? So as you can see in my notes, I have Shinto to world history. So that box is specifically about that paragraph. I'm not talking about anything else in that box. And I think I ran out of space, so I continue with this arrow to the next one, right? The political contribution. And then at the end, I have my box for, I think it was how Shintoism is practiced in our daily lives, or how it affected our daily lives. I don't know. But the point is, my notes are very organized, even if like maybe there are some parts that you can understand. I took notes on the details. I have some dates, right? I probably have some names as well. Obviously, maybe there were words that I didn't understand. That's why I have something like this. I don't know if it was spelled like this or not. You know, it doesn't really matter as long as you have something similar. Because especially if we're talking about Japanese religion, then maybe they have Japanese words and stuff. So maybe there were words that I couldn't catch, but as long as I had something similar, it's fine. You know, and I have very detailed notes. This World War II and stuff. So this is what you guys should be doing to take notes in the TOEFL lectures. Really, you know, I've tried different ways. This was the best strategy. And not only did it work for me, but I've applied with other students as well. And I've noticed a change. So it's important that you guys take notes in these ways. Really the best tip that I can give you for the TOEFL lectures, to take notes in this way, okay? If you don't do this, and if you just, you know, use the paper vertically, like let's try to do something here. Or maybe I can, no. So if you don't do this, and if you just use your paper vertically, this is what happens. So let's say this is your piece of paper. Sorry, I'm gonna make it here. Okay, if this is your piece of paper, then usually what you do, and what I did at first as well, is you start taking your notes like this, right? And you're leaving all of this space there. And then since we are in a rush and we're a little bit nervous as well, you don't even follow like a certain, you're not following the line here, right? So you go like this, and then you run out of space and you start taking notes here, and then you go here. And at the end of the day, it's all mixed. And you don't know where one idea ends and the other begins. So if they ask about the concept, and here you have an idea for like shrines, then you can be mixing those ideas, right? When they ask you about concept, you're gonna say something about shrines. So it's important that your notes follow the same order as in the lecture's structure and are organized in that way. Okay, guys? Is it okay? Is it clear? Do you have any questions about that? questions? Okay, guys, so please get a piece of paper and a pen, and you guys are gonna take your notes like what I just showed you. Please get a piece of paper. Okay, guys, you ready? So we're gonna listen to this lecture about perspective. You already know, you already have an idea of the structure, right? We said the types of perspective and the history, it's history now. So that will help you. Please make sure that you divide your paper like that, okay? So you have two options really. I don't know if you have like a piece of paper here. Okay, hang on, I'm gonna get one so that I can take notes too. Okay, guys, so you have two options. You have your piece of paper like this. You can either draw the lines the way that I did and divide it into 9 boxes, or if you want, you can just grab the paper. So you're gonna fold the paper like this into 3, right? I folded my paper. So I don't know if you can see, something like that, right? So I folded the paper in 2, and then you can do it one more time. Just like that. So those are your two options, okay? You can fold the paper, or if you want, you can draw the lines. That's fine. But the important thing is that you take your notes in that way, okay? Make sure that you identify when one idea ends and the other one begins. I'm gonna play the lecture now.
Listen to part of a university lecture by a professor in the College of Fine Arts. Good morning, everyone. Today I want to start with a look at perspective, visual perspective. First, we'll look very briefly at the kinds of perspective, and then we'll look very quickly at its history in art. Just in case you don't know what we're discussing, perspective in art is the way that artists represent three-dimensional objects on the 2 dimensions of their canvas. There are 2 basic sorts of visual perspective: aerial perspective and linear perspective. Aerial perspective, and aerial just means air or atmospheric, not your view from an airplane. Aerial perspective is the way that the atmosphere affects how we see things, especially distant things. I won't try to go into the laws of physics that are involved here, but it is aerial perspective that makes a mountain in the distance appear to be a different color, that makes it seem hazier, less distinct than closer objects. These are effects that realistic artists attempt to reproduce carefully and that impressionists use to create their own effects. Just think of many of Turner's landscapes or cityscapes like his Ditto building Carthage to get an idea of how the air can affect what we see. Another perspective, linear perspective, is the way that things seem to get smaller the farther away they get. A classic example of this is the way we perceive railroad tracks or a line of telephone poles running away from us. They seem to get smaller and smaller as they recede, until they vanish in a point on the horizon. And this point is appropriately called the vanishing point. This effect happens whenever there are parallel lines like the 2 train tracks or the tops and bottoms of the telephone poles. Now, an object or a scene may have more than one vanishing point. A cube, with one of its faces squarely perpendicular to us, has a single vanishing point, directly behind it and on the horizon. But a cube with one of its vertical edges facing us has 2 vanishing points instead, one for the right-hand face and one for the left-hand face. And these points are off to the right and left respectively, on the horizon, where the parallel lines of the faces seem to converge. And then, If this same cube is viewed from somewhat above or below, it will have 3 vanishing points. One to the right, one to the left, and a third one behind it and below or above the horizon. This is easy to visualize if you look up at a corner building from its street intersection. You can look down one street to see the right-hand vanishing point, look down the cross street to see the left-hand vanishing point, and then look up along the corner of the building to visualize the third vanishing point. These kinds of perspective are easy to see if we view geometrical shapes or man-made structures. But of course, natural scenes don't have any sets of parallel lines, so they have no vanishing points. But that doesn't mean that they don't exhibit perspective. The laws of optics were not understood at all in early Western art. Artists recognized the effect, of course, but they were unable to figure out how to represent it accurately. From the paintings inside the Egyptian pyramids to the illustrations in medieval Christian churches, nearer people were simply drawn larger, or drawn lower in the picture, or drawn so as to cover the people farther away. There was no real understanding of how the physics of perception worked. They never got a grasp on the idea of the vanishing point. And then came the Renaissance, the rebirth of learning and the sciences. This was a hotbed of scientific thought. Da Vinci, Galileo, Newton, and Filippo Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi was a 15th century Florentine architect who conducted several optical experiments and discovered the rules of perspective. With what he had learned, he drew a very accurate picture of San Giovanni Baptistry in Florence, and then he made a small peephole in the middle of it. He carried it into the street and amazed all his acquaintances by having them look through the peephole from the back of his picture. First, at a mirror which reflected the image into the viewer's line of sight. Then, Brunelleschi would quickly withdraw the mirror, leaving the viewer peeping at the real baptistry, whose perspective had been replicated perfectly. Other Italian artists, notably Donatello, began using Brunelleschi's methods for accurate linear perspective, and his ideas soon spread throughout Europe. The development of effective aerial perspective, on the other hand, was developed by the Flemish and Dutch masters of this same period, and can be seen at its best in works like Jan van Eyck's The Virgin of Chancellor Roland. But that's another story.
Okay, guys. So, how was it? Were you able to identify the different points that were discussed? I know. I'm going to show you my notes very quickly, and I'm going to ask you to please show me your notes as well. These are my notes. I did them with a marker, so they're not that easy to understand. But basically, you know, in the first part, I just have something for the introduction. I have the 2 types there later. I think the first topic was about the first type, right? Which was aerial perspective. So I have everything here. I think they gave some examples about some paintings that use aerial perspective. Then I have something for linear perspective on the next box, which was, they also gave some examples, I think, the definition of linear perspective. Then they discussed vanishing points, right? And that was pretty large. That's why I didn't need more than one box. They discussed vanishing points. I think there was 1, 2, and 3 vanishing points with examples. So I think all of these are vanishing points. And then they started talking about the history. So something about Western art, how they didn't understand perspective. And then I think it was an artist, Bruno something, I don't remember, who discovered perspective and like put it in practice. And then it was spread in Europe. And I don't remember what was last. Okay, I think it was, they changed the subject, right? But basically, those were the topics that I was able to identify. How are your notes? Can you please show them to me on your cameras so that I can take a look at them? I'm gonna stop sharing so that I can see. Okay, so Wheeler, could you please show me your notes? Okay, I cannot really see. It's like it's blurred. a little bit, if you can.
Teacher, actually, in my case, I couldn't do it because I didn't buy even paper, but I will buy paper today
Okay.
because I want to get paper for tomorrow and the rest of the
All
days.
right,
Sorry.
Lenny. No problem. Give me a second. So, okay, great. Wheeler, I see that you even have little pictures in there. You have fewer notes than I have, which is great. You know, it's not the goal to have so many notes, but you didn't fill out too many boxes, right? You have history there, just a few notes.
I have
Okay.
4 boxes.
Okay, great. Yes, there were a lot of details, right? Which is why I took so many notes. But let's see, we're gonna see the questions and whether they require more notes or not. Thanks, Wilker. What about you, Edwin? Can you show me your notes?
Yes, I did it in my tablet, but I'm not sure if it can be shown.
Oh, yes, I can see. Great. So you have 6 boxes, I think. I cannot really read, but they look really organized. Were you able to understand? Okay, there you have concept. Were you able to understand what the subtopics were?
Yes, I get a little bit confused because the types he talked about area perspective and linear perspective, and I thought linear it wasn't going to be that large about the vanish point, so I did it in only one box. But
Okay.
after that, everything was fine, I guess.
Okay, Eric, thanks. One tip, don't ever practice using your tablet, right? Make sure that you do it in hand because that's the way it's gonna be in the test. So practice as realistically as it can be. Where are the rest, Gamaliel? Okay, great, I can see. Nice, and I like the fact that you have like the first topics underlined, so that means that you were able to understand the subtopics. Okay, great. And Sergio?
Means I couldn't take notes because I left the class for a moment.
All right, okay. All right, guys, well, either way, tomorrow we're gonna practice the way we did for the conversations. Now let's go to the question, shall we? Do you have any questions before we go there? The first one says, what is this lecture mainly about? You know the techniques we used for the reading? You should be doing something like that. Honestly, I would suggest that first you read the question and then you try to answer it in your mind. So obviously this lecture was about perspective, right? But we don't have that option. So which one is closest to that?
Sorry, perspective is the same of viewpoint.
No. Yes, perspective and viewpoint is the same. But an artistic viewpoint, I don't know.
Oh, okay. See.
It could be optical effect.
Yes, right, great. How do we know? We know, I mean, you read the question, you answer it in your head. Well, it's about perspective. We don't know, I mean, we don't have that option. So maybe you go to your notes or you remember that perspective, the definition was the way that an artist represents three-dimensional objects in a two-dimensional canvas, right? That is perspective. So what is that? Is that an interesting observation? Not really, right? The professor isn't talking about something he observed. No. Is it an artistic viewpoint? That is really tricky because yes, as Jasper is saying, or as Rennie is saying, sorry, a viewpoint is the same as a perspective, right? But an artistic viewpoint, that means an opinion from an artist, right? So it's totally different. So this wasn't somebody's opinion. This wasn't somebody's perspective. It was about the optical effect perspective. And although they do talk about a historical evolution, that wasn't the main topic. The main topic was perspective, which is an optical effect, right? Is this one okay? Do you have any questions?
No question.
Okay. Second one says, which is a characteristic of realistic landscape paintings? Landscape paintings.
Mm,
Mm, mm, Later A and C.
Okay, but we can only choose one.
Later C.
Okay. What about the rest? You know, guys?
I will go with C.
Okay, EDC, great. This is a clear example of how having organized notes will help you. Because if you like, I don't know notes, but like for example, in my case, in the second box, I have everything about aerial perspective. And there I have the word atmospheric, and I have the word realistic landscapes, impressionist, ditto building as an example. Those are the notes that I have in that box that responds to aerial perspective. So what happens? I know that realistic landscapes were mentioned in the paragraph or in the subtopic about aerial perspective, which is basically atmospheric effects. So I know that it has to be C because it has to do with aerial perspective with the atmospheric effects. So it's gotta be C, there's no other way. I know that realistic landscape paintings weren't mentioned when we talked about vanishing points. And clear from a distance, that was about linear perspective, right? I have distance in linear perspective. Renaissance art, that was later in the lecture about the history of perspective. So two things here. One, if we understand the order, we know that aerial perspective was the first thing that was mentioned. Then question two, if the first one was about the topic, then the second one is very likely gonna be about the first subtopic, which was aerial perspective, right? So I know that it's gonna be of aerial perspective. And I don't, and in my notes, the only place where I have this is aerial perspective, right? Together with atmospheric effects. So do you guys have any questions? Is that okay so far? Yes. Okay. So the third one says, why does the professor mention Turner's painting, the Ditto Building Cafe?
Was mentioned, Turner.
D.
I say issue.
Edvi, you say?
D.
D2, okay. Yeah.
D. D.
D and ready?
Multiple vanishing points. Yeah.
Okay. Are you saying D because of the order? No, not really, right? Because after aerial perspective, we had linear perspective. So I don't think so. So I don't know. We're gonna choose that one, but I honestly think it's aerial perspective because I have Ditto building in my notes in the box for aerial perspective. And second, because remember the tip that I gave you, follow the order. The first one was aerial perspective, the second one was linear. So honestly, I would say it would be A or C, just by following the order. Vanishing points was the third subtopic. So I would say that just by following the order, I would go with A or C. And now by looking at my notes, I have the building for aerial perspective. So I think it will be A, okay? But we're gonna Now, question 4 says, according to the professor, why was the Renaissance conducive to art? So go to that part, history.
C.
Okay, do you guys agree? Yes. Okay, let's go for C. I agree with you. I think it will be C. I mean, in just by like another tip, just to be logical. We know this was about perspective. So probably it created an atmosphere of scientific curiosity. I don't know, how is that related to art? How is that related to perspective? How is that related to the topic? Now, it opened the classics to European thought. So, I don't know, what does this have to do with anything, right? I think they do mention a European, but obviously everything needs to be related to the topic. Everything is like, everything is turning around perspective. So I don't think it has to be with European thought. It opened the class to the European thought. So honestly, just by being logical, C and D are the best options, right? Now the thing about D is I don't think that the Dutch masters were the ones correct, right? So yes. Now question 5 says, foreshortening is a way of representing an object so that it conveys the illusion of depth. And its success often depends upon a point of view in which the sizes of near and far parts of an object contrast greatly. Foreshortening is an instance of what? This is interesting. Way of representing an object so that it conveys the illusion of depth. Look for those words, depth. Sizes, in which the
Yes,
size. Sorry?
I was going to say that I think it's letter A. Option
Okay. Perspective. Is that the one that talks about sizes?
I would
A.
say
Also,
D.
I put D. Sorry.
Right?
C.
The vanishing points. Yes, could be too. I don't know. Gabriel?
Oh, letter C. Maybe.
And Rennie?
I think letter C.
Letter C? As in cat?
Yeah.
Okay. Wilder?
D.
D. Okay, so yeah, I think it's linear perspective. One, because aerial perspective doesn't have to do with distances. I mean, it has to do with distances, right? Not size or depth. So linear perspective is the one that talks about depth. And I think if they also like make a comparison between a shorter person and a taller person. So sizes have to be really contrasted. I don't know. Let's see. We're going to check our answers. So the first one's great, an optical effect. The second one's great as well, atmospheric effects. The third one was A, area and perspective. So as we said, video building was meant area. Now the Renaissance it was actually A. It created an atmosphere of scientific curiosity. Okay, I don't really understand why. Does anyone have think in your notes? Do you guys have something related to this in your notes?
I think it mentions different persons that try to experiment in this part of perspective. Okay. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, right. I think that, yes, maybe I think like because they make a comparison, right? They say in the Western art, they have no understanding of perspective, but in the Renaissance, they start like looking at art from a more scientific way, right? And that's why I think it was, I don't remember their last name, but it was Brunatel or Bruno something. that started experimenting with perspective, right? And he was the one that's maybe that's, I don't know. So yes, it wasn't that it debunked earlier theories. And question 5 is good, linear perspective.
I see.
So what do you guys think? How do you feel so far about it?
Step by step, we are going to improve. So we were saying what we thought. That's why maybe we weren't right 100%, but we started practicing more and more.
Yeah, it was our first class. Tomorrow we'll practice. And of course, you're going to practice on your own, I assume. So yes, guys. Do you have any questions before we go?
Teacher, sorry, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Teacher, sorry, yesterday I couldn't come to this class because I was working. And in the group, someone told us that there is a wait, let me read, sorry. Let me read because I want to know what is this about. Okay, it says that we have a test and we have to do a first simulation. So what is the deadline to that?
I mean, you should be doing it ideally the first week that you start the course. But anyways, you can ask the coordinator, the one that sent that's the one that sent the text, and she will give you all the instructions.
Okay, I see.
Yes. And you have the link there. I think that we have some tutorials on how to do it as well on the website.
I see.
Can you send us the link, please, about of this exercise, please?
You mean the link to the practice sets we've been doing?
Yeah, please.
Yes, true. Honestly, like, because this isn't official from the ETS, but this is the best website that I found because there are many, many websites. But this is the closest one, I'd say, to the types of questions you get in the real world. And of course, you can practice from the ETS website as well. But this shows us the transcript. That's why I'm using this one.
I see.
Okay, guys. Any other question? Okay, guys, then please don't forget to fill out today's survey. I'm just sending it.
Okay, I already made it.
Okay, guys. Yes, I can see. Thank you so much, then. I will see you next class at 0 tomorrow.
See you, teacher.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, teacher.
Bye.
Bye, guys.